Bon après-midi. Je suis très contente d'être ici avec vous. Je voudrais remercier les organisateurs pour cette opportunité. Et je dois parler en anglais. Je m'excuse. The idea was to try and see what's going on in Central and South America in terms of animal welfare, especially focusing farm animal welfare. So in order to try and get this view, we set up a survey, and I'll be talking mostly about this survey, and then a couple of selected needs that we perceived, and planned strategies and our major conclusion regarding what's going on. So the organizers asked me to talk about the current state of animal welfare, social and cultural specificities that impact on animal welfare, political will to improve animal welfare, and the importance of European demands and directives on animal welfare in Central and South America. So it's a lot, and we only have 20 minutes, so I'll try to just go through the main points. In order to try to understand these issues, we set up this questionnaire and we sent it to 20 countries, the 13 countries in South America and 7 countries in Central America, and this does not include the Caribbeans, okay? So we sent these questionnaires, and they were mostly responded by, we addressed people in universities, in animal welfare research centers, and people in the Ministry of Agriculture in these countries. And we've only got responses from 7 countries: Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Suriname, Venezuela, and Brazil. In Brazil, of course, we were the respondents, so we have more data from Brazil, I'm afraid. Even though the rate of response was not that high, I would like to point out that these countries that did respond are responsible for most of the animal production activities, okay? So they together, these 7 countries, they comprise 85% of all cattle production in South America, 81.4% of pig production, and 77% of poultry production. So we do have a significant view here. This map is showing the concentration of cattle production, and the darker the color, the more animals in the country. So you can see that Brazil is the major producer, and we in Brazil have usually numbers that are higher than in all other countries added up together. So this is another reason for focusing in Brazil. These are the countries that did respond, so they are mostly countries that have high concentration of animal production. Because we had this very low rate of responses, we also checked some websites to see whether we could add information on our topics of interest. So we looked through 3 different sites. We searched for websites from governmental bodies from each of the countries. We also searched the Animal Protection Index from the World Animal Protection, and also another website specifically on animal law. So we have this data as well. In terms of the current state of animal welfare, the countries that did respond positively in terms of regulation mentioned mostly animal protection law, transport and slaughter regulations. So these are the areas that are mostly regulated in these countries. No country has replied with regulations for on-farm indicators or items, okay? And even then, when respondents did affirm that they have these recommendations, they always pointed to issues that are not solved yet. So it needs improvement, even when regulated. This is the result from the online search. So this now is not from respondents, but from websites. And again, the laws and regulations that we saw were mostly on animal protection, transport regulations, and slaughter regulations. And from these 3, perhaps the weakest one is transport regulations. And we do not have much in terms of other types of regulations for farm animals. Okay, this is not, lab animals is a different scenario, okay? So in terms of animal welfare regulations, that's mostly the picture we saw. But I would like to remember that perhaps talking about animal welfare regulations is not the whole story. We should try and look to the animals themselves and trying to think, what is the animal welfare status for Central and South America? I think we do not really know for now. And I don't think it's known from any place in the world, actually, how the animals live in our different production systems. This is a regular industrial flock of broiler chicken in Belgium. So I think in most of Europe it's like this in the industrial system. So it's a completely closed barn with temperature that is regulated, humidity is regulated, air. So this is a very typical picture. And this is same type of industry, typical unit for broiler chicken production in the south of Brazil. And we had the opportunity to compare these two scenarios which are producing for the same type of industry, okay? And our results published at the Poultry Science Journal points to this situation, okay? It's a small sample, it's just 10 flocks in Belgium and 11 flocks in Brazil. And what we saw is that, well, we've used the welfare quality assessment, which was very well presented this morning by Isabelle Vissier. And this is the final level of welfare, okay? Remember that we had acceptable as the closest to the lowest rate. The other one was non-classifiable, okay? So acceptable, all these units were acceptable. That means very low welfare, okay? But we subdivided the acceptable range into three, acceptable minus, medium, and plus. And what we saw is that all of these flocks were acceptable. None were higher or excellent for welfare. And the Brazilian flocks were 8 in the medium and 3 in acceptable plus, while the Belgian were 4 in the minus and 6 in the medium. So this is just to show that we really cannot assume that regulations are doing that much of a change. We also have studied certification. So I believe regulation is the way to go, but I think that our requirements are rather low today in terms of animal welfare. So just to remember that we are not saying that the situation is good anywhere here. It's low welfare for all the birds. Acceptable means that. Okay, the other point, social and cultural specificities that impact on animal welfare. This is a very huge topic, and we would need much more than a single approach for this. But something that appeared in all respondents is the fact that the animals that are really working with the people, that are working with the animals, they have very low educational level. It's not to say that higher educational level will guarantee better welfare, but it's not good to have low educational level. It's not helping. In Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Suriname, there are official good agricultural practices training programs, and there are some welfare items in these programs. They are just beginning, but it's already a good sign. They are official from the Ministry of Agriculture in these countries. The only two countries where we are sure that there is no training, no official training in this sense, is those where respondents stated so, and these are Argentina and Venezuela. So in these two countries, there is no official training. I'd like to make sure that I let it very clear that we are seeing just a tiny bit of the whole scenario, okay? We know that there are countries that are doing things that did not respond to our questionnaire. For instance, Uruguay has a very nice Center for Animal Welfare, and we're reporting here on responses that we were able to get. Other things regarding cultural specificities and even geographical ones. In South American countries, animals, especially cattle, are most raised on pasture. Our climate usually favors free-range systems, so it's not an obstacle for having animals going outside. Some of the specificities were opposite depending on the respondent. So, for instance, in Brazil and Chile, respondents said that organization of the production chain facilitates dissemination of animal welfare practices. So if you want to have any change in the way poultry is produced in Brazil or Chile, it's very, in a way, simple because the production chain is integrated. Other countries said just the opposite, the lack of organization and the difficulties in implementing changes. Short distances for transport as an advantage for small countries, that was the response from Ecuador. And it's also a disadvantage for big countries such as Brazil or Argentina. Public concern for animal welfare also was sort of a double kind of responses. Some countries said, well, there are concerns coming from the public, and this is helpful to implement animal welfare changes. And other countries responded that, well, there is no public concern, so it's very difficult to bring about changes. In terms of political will to improve animal welfare, there are some initiatives in terms of governmental funding for animal welfare in Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador. Although I have to say that this is usually funding for research in general, and it's very hard to compete if you are proposing an animal welfare project and if you are competing with nutrition projects or animal production indexes. It's a very tough competition. There are now, in some countries, animal welfare committees within mostly the ministries of agriculture, and this is helpful. This is the way good agricultural practices today, for instance, include animal welfare and animal management training. And it's also probably true that the political will is very much influenced by society demands. And society demands are changing in most countries. In Brazil, for instance, we have an exponential number of activism in terms of animal protection, and this has been very helpful in changing the average citizen thought in terms of animal protection, even though sometimes it's disregarded as extremist. I think it's playing an important role in Brazil. Vegetarianism is increasing in Brazil as well, so it seems that animals are increasingly part of the moral circle in these societies. In terms of the importance of European demands and directives on animal welfare, in the sense as to whether they are helping animals in different places in the world, my perspective from South America is that there are many, many positive effects of what Europe does here in terms of not only directives and recommendations, but also in terms of science, producing knowledge for understanding questions related to animal welfare. So the first thing I would like to say is the most obvious thing that people usually recognize. Well, if a country exports animal products to Europe, and Europe requires some level of animal welfare, of course there will be a change in this producing system. But there are also indirect effects, because many times when my experience is mostly with poultry, but if you visit a farm where part of the production is directed to export for Europe, the farm will change as a whole, not only the section that is geared toward exportation. So these changes are diffused, they are not localized specifically within the production that is aimed at exporting. So I think if this direct effect is a little broader when we talk specifically about the export demands. The bulk of knowledge we have today stems from, in animal welfare, from initiatives in Europe. So I think this is, perhaps it's my biased vision, but I think this is the way changes will happen. And this is a major collaboration from European research groups. And another thing that I think it's very important is that once Europe sets up a directive or a regulation, and it implements in maybe not all countries, but many countries that are part of the European community, this is very, very important for people elsewhere, at least for people in South America, because it proves that it's viable. It proves that we can make the change. And it's also an inspiration. Someone used this word before, and I think it's very important. It's inspirational. For instance, when the animal use for cosmetics was being discussed and approved in Europe, I think it was 2009. This was stemmed many discussions in Brazil, and today we have a full state, the state of São Paulo, that passed a law forbidding the use of animals for research in cosmetics. And there is a project of law that is in discussion in the federal level, so it's clearly follow-up from what's happened in Europe. Also, not only laws, but private initiatives are also looking to what's happening in Europe, and this is transforming what's happening in Brazil. One of our major meat producing industry, I think is the biggest in the world today, since it stems from a merge between other big companies. Okay, this is BR Foods, which is a merge between two other big companies. And they just announced that they will ban gestation cages in pig production. Okay, so this is great news for sows, I'm sure. However, it's not that wonderful because look at the deadline they gave themselves. It's a big, long, but it means that changes are coming, and not only through law, but also through the private sector. Well, what do we need? I think many things. First, it's very important to produce local information. Not everything will be solved by looking at what Europe is doing, because our reality is different. One example for that, we need to set up parameters for humane slaughter of fish. And Europe will probably not study the species of fish that we produce in Brazil, so we need to produce our local information. We also need adaptation of knowledge to local characteristics. Even the assessment of welfare needs to be adapted. Our systems, many of them are free range, so we need to build up on that. Being free range, there are local geographic and climate characteristics that we have to take into consideration. Another issue that is very important is transparency from the industry to the consumer. This is a major problem. We still have labels in Brazil where, you know, you buy, for instance, industrial eggs, and there are happy chickens in the label, so it's very misleading, and usually people have no idea on how these these hens were maintained, and so it's very hard for them to make a choice. We've studied willingness to pay in Brazil, and we've seen that lack of knowledge on production systems is a major bottleneck for people to really see a difference in these products. So we need better labeling, and that's not that simple. It requires labeling and someone auditing to make sure that the label is really saying what's done. Information of animal welfare throughout the production system. As I said, most of our regulation and information is related to slaughter, transport and slaughter. We need to know how animals are living their lives before that. And product availability, we have some data on that as well, but mostly sometimes consumer cannot find products with higher welfare, and this, of course, is limiting. Planning strategies, I think it's very important that we work with education in animal welfare in universities. I mean, vet schools, animal science schools, and so on. We need a structure for this supranational type of monitoring and information gathering, because it's very difficult to know what's happening even within Brazil. When I have to talk about South America, it's really hard to know what's going on. Perhaps OIE can be very helpful because it already has some kind of structure there. And mechanisms for enforcement of regulations. This is no different from any other place. So in conclusion, what's going on in terms of animal welfare in Central and South America? I can't really say in much detail, but there are things going on. I'm afraid that's the best answer to our first question. We need information on a continental level. That was very difficult to obtain. And plan strategies to improve animal welfare in our countries. So thank you very much for your attention, and it was a pleasure being here with you.